Well, it has been a while, but welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Jank Tank. My name is Zach from far North MTG, and since it has been quite a while since I did one of these, I think like 8 or 9 months, I always did when I started this channel, I intended to do these a lot more frequently, but, procrastination happens. But anyways, finally back with a fresh episode of the Jank Tank. Since the channel has grown so much since the last time I did one of these, I will spend a second here to kind of reintroduce the series. So if you haven't seen one of these episodes before, basically the Jank Tank is a series where I go over the weird, wacky, and underexplored decks within the cEDH format. We take a look at decks ranging from off-meta brews all the way to decks reaching the far, barely playable fringes of the cEDH format. In each episode, we discuss a different deck and a different commander, go over the cards within the deck, go do a brief combo showcase, and then I'll place the deck onto a tier list talking about where I see the deck within the cEDH metagame. Basically a long-winded way to say that this is a series where I do deck techs for off-meta and weird decks. Decks for the freaks, if you will. And if you're like me and feeling a little bit freaky, I got a good one for you today. This is a deck for the Weevil Underwoods of the cEDH format. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Grist the Hunger Tide. Today we'll be looking at Shane from far North MTG, Shane's list here. If you've watched the channel a little bit, you'll know that Shane is the resident Grist player on the channel, so we'll be looking at his list, and since it is his list, here's a brief word from Shane about Grist.
Hey everyone, I'm Shane. It's the big face reveal. This is my first appearance, and I'm here to talk about Grist. I picked up Grist because I wanted to try out a Protean Hulk pile, since I haven't played one before, and Grist seemed like the most interesting to me. I feel like Grist adds a little more value than some of the other Golgari Hulk piles. I think the appeal to play Protean Hulk is that it does pretty well in this mid-range hell meta we've been seeing, just because once Protean Hulk gets going, there's not a whole lot of interaction, so it's really hard to deal with once it gets going. The deck is also pretty resilient. Once Protean Hulk is in the graveyard, every single reanimation spell we cast acts as a win attempt. So if that gets stopped, we just cast Reanimate and try again. I also like playing decks where the commander looks cool, and I mean, look at this guy.
Like he said here, first on-camera appearance for Shane, so everybody head down to the comments and go ahead and say hi, Shane. But anyways, we're here to talk about Grist, so let's talk about Grist. So as is with most commander decks, it does make sense to start off by discussing the commander himself. So here we have Christopher Nolan, a 3-mana Golgari Planeswalker, and you may notice one key missing line of text here that most Planeswalker commanders have, stating that it can be your commander. We are able to circumvent this due to the fact that Grist's passive ability does say that he's a creature everywhere except for the battlefield, meaning that in the command zone he is a legendary 1/1 bug creature. So what exactly does Grist do? Well, a few things. His +1 allows us to mill a card and make a 1/1 insect, then repeat this process if we mill an insect, which, spoiler alert, we will never do this. His -2 allows us to sacrifice a creature to destroy another creature or planeswalker on the battlefield, and his -5 won't come up, so let's just not even talk about that one. So what's the appeal here, you might ask? So essentially what Grist offers in the form of his +1 and his -1 is the unique ability to serve as both an entomb and a sacrifice outlet for Protean Hulk, while other Golgari Hulk commanders generally can only do one of these two things. If you're familiar at all with Grist in cEDH, you likely know him from the variation of the deck titled 12 Entombs, which was on the cEDH database for a while. This name comes from the fact that Grist's +1 ability turns any top deck tutor into an Entomb, giving us easy access to Protean Hulk or Hoarding Broodlord in the graveyard for later reanimator lines. So that's the commander. Now let's talk about the 99 a little bit, starting with creatures. As I mentioned before, we have both Hoarding Broodlord and Protean Hulk as our primary reanimation targets. To round out the Protean Hulk package, we have activated Sleeper to double up on Hulk triggers with the sacrifice pieces of Carrion Feeder and Viscera Seer to enable it, Sylvan Safekeeper for a bit of protection, and Mikaeus the Unhallowed with Walking Ballista as the win condition. We also have Grim's Servant as a secondary Hulk pile involving Witherbloom Apprentice alongside the solitary Planeswalker in the deck in the form of Professor Onyx that I neglected to mention earlier because it makes sense to talk about both the Professor and the Apprentice together since they functionally serve the same purpose. I'll go into more specifics as to what those purposes are as we get into the combos later on in the video, but moving on from combo pieces and win conditions, we have the general mana acceleration you'll expect in these decks, all of the usual suspects, and we also have some utility pieces in the form of Orcish Bowmasters, Eternal Witness, and Opposition Agent. So that's it for creatures, so moving on to instants and sorceries, and in the sorceries section, the first thing that sticks out is that you will see the Chain of Smog that pairs with the aforementioned Miss Onyx and the Apprentice. We have 1 sorcery speed Entomb in the form of Unmarked Grave, and 3 top deck tutors in the form of Scheming Symmetry, Sylvan Tutor, and Imperial Seal, which courtesy of Grist and Bale are functionally Entombs. In a similar vein, we also have Lively Dirge, which can serve as both an Entomb and a reanimation if we need it, though notably, unfortunately, it can't get the Protean Hulk or the Hoarding Broodlord. It has to get one of our smaller creatures, but it can be handy reanimation for some of our smaller combo pieces. We have the typical duo of Demonic Tutor and Diabolic Intent, as well as a couple green tutors in the form of Finale of Devastation and Eldritch Evolution, which notably is also another way to kill the Protean Hulk if we need to do so. We have several reanimation pieces here as well in the form of Footsteps of the Goryo, Life After Death, Persist, and Reanimate. We also have a Yawgmoth's Will here, which is part of the Hoarding Broodlord combo that we'll talk about later on in the video, a Praetor's Grasp to steal something if necessary, and a Culling Ritual, which is honestly one of the best cards in the Golgari color pie at the moment, and is one of the primary reasons to play Golgari plus decks in my opinion. In the instance section, we'll find the typical Golgari removal suite. We also have 3 more Entombs in the form of, well, Entomb itself, and Worldly Tutor and Vampiric Tutor, which, as I mentioned before, Grist turns them into Entombs with his +1. We get mana acceleration in the form of Dark Ritual, Culling the Weak, and Cabal Ritual, Noxious Revival to recycle anything in our graveyard that we need back, 1 Forbidden Tutor in the form of Tainted Pact, 1 instant speed reanimation effect in Shallow Grave, protection from Veil of Summer, and last but not least, more combo pieces in the form of Sacrifice and Saw in Half. I'll just very briefly skim over the artifacts here since it's all the typical mana stuff in the One Ring that we are all used to seeing in cEDH decks, but we do have a couple different things here in the form of Vexing Bauble to help protect our combos from free interaction since Golgari does struggle with that, as well as a Skull Clamp to turn those 1/1 bugs that Grist Pratt makes us into card draw. In enchantments, we get more mana with Carpet of Flowers and Wild Growth, Survival of the Fittest, which is both a tutor and a way to put our reanimation targets into the graveyard, and of course the reanimation enchantments in Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, and Necromancy. We also have Sylvan Library, which is an incredible card in this deck, or really any Protean Hulk deck, since we play so many cards that we don't want to see in our hand and we'd rather have in our library so that we can later search it up off of Protean Hulk or Hoarding Broodlord. And this is a way to make sure that as the game goes on, we don't accidentally draw into them at an inopportune time. And lands are, well, they're the typical lands. Nothing really insane to point out here, but I do want to say, Surveil Land, you know, if you watch this channel, you know we love our Surveil Lands here at Far North MTG. This is also a way to pair one of our top deck tutors into an Entomb. Phyrexian Tower is another way to kill Protean Hulk, and Shifting Woodlands can help us go for win attempts again after we've been stopped. So that is the gist of Grist. Now that we've talked about the 99 and the Commander, let's go ahead and talk about some of the combos in the combo showcase. Alright, so let's start by talking about Protean Hulk, since these are the more straightforward and kind of bread and butter combos within the deck. For this scenario, we're going to imagine that we have Grist on the battlefield at 3 loyalty and the mana to cast the spells that we need to cast. We will now go ahead and cast Entomb or use any other card to put Protean Hulk into our graveyard, which we're going to put right over here. Cast Animate Dead or any other reanimation spell that you have access to return Protean Hulk to the battlefield. From here, we will -2 Grist, sacrificing Protean Hulk, putting it and the Animate Dead into the graveyard. This will trigger Protean Hulk's death trigger, getting us 6 total power worth of creatures to the battlefield. Off of this trigger, we're going to get Activated Sleeper, which will enter the battlefield as a copy of Protean Hulk. We'll get a Carrion Feeder, we'll get a Sylvan Safekeeper, and we'll get a creature of 1 mana value. Can be literally anything here. Deathrite Shaman is just the stand-in I chose here. We'll activate Carrion Feeder, putting a counter on it, sacrificing the Protean Hulk Activated Sleeper, triggering it in the graveyard once again. We'll get 6 more mana value worth of creatures, and off of this we'll get Micaias the Unhallowed and Walking Ballista. Notably, Walking Ballista will not die due to the Anthem effect that Micaias the Unhallowed has. Now we can activate Carrion Feeder, putting another counter on it, sacrificing Walking Ballista, triggering the Undying from Micaias, and returning Walking Ballista to the battlefield, conveniently with a +1/+1 counter on it. We'll remove the +1/+1 counter, ping an opponent, reactivate Carrion Feeder, sacrificing it, triggering Undying, bringing it back once again with a counter, pinging an opponent, and rinsing and repeating until the table is dead. Now to discuss Protean Hulk line number 2. Just like before, we're going to use any method to put Protean Hulk into the graveyard, cast any sort of reanimation to bring the Protean Hulk back from the graveyard, -2 Grist once again, sacrificing the Protean Hulk and getting another trigger in the graveyard. If you want a little more protection, you can use the same Activated Sleeper, Carrion Feeder, Sylvan Safekeeper thing to protect your combo pieces during this part, but it is not necessary. You can just proceed straight to the end step on this one. If you choose to do that, just go ahead and sacrifice again the Activated Sleeper Protean Hulk, getting another trigger in the graveyard, getting 6 more mana value worth as creatures, and here we're going to get Witherbloom Apprentice and Grim Servant. When Grim Servant enters the battlefield, he'll tutor a card to our hand. We will find this handy dandy Chain of Smog. We'll cast Chain of Smog targeting ourselves, we'll discard 2 cards and choose to copy it, once again targeting ourselves. We'll continue to do this process even if we have no cards in hand because we can choose to do so. We'll do this infinitely until we drain out the table with Magecraft triggers. Now let's talk about Hoarding Broodlord. For this, once again, we're going to assume we have Grist on the battlefield at 3 loyalty. As with the previous, just like before, we're going to use any method to put Hoarding Broodlord into our graveyard. Let's just assume we have it there already. Next, we're going to cast Reanimate, or really any reanimation spell, bringing Hoarding Broodlord back to the battlefield and triggering its ETB ability. We'll fetch up a copy of Saw in Half to exile under Hoarding Broodlord, and we'll tap Hoarding Broodlord to convoke and cast the Saw in Half. We'll go ahead and destroy the Hoarding Broodlord and create 2 token copies of it. When those token copies enter the battlefield, we'll go ahead and get 2 more copies of Hoarding Broodlord's ETB trigger. We're going to go ahead and fetch up 1 and 2 cards to the Hoarding Broodlords. Go ahead and convoke, sacrifice one of the copies, casting Sacrifice, adding 8 black mana to our mana pool. Go ahead and convoke Hoarding Broodlord number 2 and spend 2 mana to cast a Yawgmoth's Will. This will allow us to recast cards from our graveyard. Use 3 more of our mana to recast Saw in Half from the graveyard, destroying our token copy of Hoarding Broodlord and creating 2 more token copies of it. These 2 copies will enter the battlefield and get 2 more ETB triggers, tutoring up 2 more cards. Spend 1 mana once again to recast Sacrifice, sacrificing one of our token copies of Hoarding Broodlord, adding 8 more mana, going to 10 total floating black. Spend 5 and convoke to cast Professor Onyx. You can also use Witherbloom Apprentice here if you have access to green, but we're just using Professor Onyx for this example. We'll go ahead and use 2 more to cast Chain of Smog, and just like with the combo with Witherbloom Apprentice, we'll target ourselves, continually copy it, triggering Magecraft and burning out the table. Alright, so that is Grist, and that is how we win here with Grist. Even though I only showed 3 of these combos, there's a lot of different diverging lines that you can do within the deck, specifically with the Hoarding Broodlord lines. There's a lot of really creative things that you can do to close out the games in different ways, depending on various points of interactions that the deck has. It really is a really resilient list, really resilient combo once you get that Hoarding Broodlord or Protean Hulk engines online. Anyways, now we've talked about the 99, we've talked about the combos, so let's talk about that tier list that I mentioned at the start of the video, where we're going to put Grist. And I'll start by talking about the individual tiers on the list before we get into that. So here is our handy dandy tier list. We've only got 3 tiers here, as you can see, and I'm imagining a fictional S tier above this that's not pictured on the tier list. You can picture in your head, above this there is a S tier that includes all of the decks within the cEDH meta. This is where your Blue Farm, TNT, Rogsai, Rogthras, all of these top meta decks, this is where they are. So you can imagine that there is a fictional S tier above this. So talking about our actual tiers here, I have in the A tier our decks that I think are genuinely underrated, potentially some of the best within their colors, but just aren't quite up to snuff as the regular meta decks are. B tier decks are decks that I think are still very good and playable, but just have specific weaknesses that hold them back and are outclassed by other decks within the same colors. And C tier is what I would call casual cEDH. These are decks that I think can keep up at cEDH tables and take games on a game-to-game basis. It's just that they have a lot of things going for them that make them not great for tournament play. But they're still great for those less serious games in between rounds or after tournaments. They're a lot of fun to play. Just because I put something in C tier doesn't mean I don't think something should be played. I do think these decks are still a ton of fun and should be played. It just means that I think that, maybe not the best tournament option. So anyways, where would I put Grist? And I think Grist is solidly our first A tier that we have within this series. I really do think Grist is one of the better, if not the best option that we have within Golgari. I am sorry, Gitrog player monsters, I do think Grist is just a little bit better. It's for sure the best of the Protean Hulk options that you have in Golgari. When it comes to Golgari piles in cEDH, you pretty much either have these Golgari Hulk piles or you have Gitrog monster, and I think for sure it is the best of the Golgari Hulk piles. I think whether you want to say it's better than Gitrog or not is probably a little bit debatable. I personally think that it is. Anyways, that is it for this installment of the Jank Tank. Head down to the comments and let me know what decks I should cover in the future. Let me know if you've played Grist and let me know what your thoughts on the list are. I think Grist is really sweet. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel a little bit more, head down to the description where you can find links to our Patreon store and check out some of our Patreon tiers. But with all that out of the way, once again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.